Hello and welcome to our Bible study. Today from my office, just a little change of pace here. We are in the fifth section of this Bible study on the Gospel of Matthew. Just a quick reminder, Matthew's Gospel is in five major sections called five books, and we're right at the end of book one today. Before book one, there's an introduction. It's got the birth narratives and a genealogy about Jesus. After the fifth book, there is the story of what are called the passion narratives of Jesus, the story of his last week of life and his crucifixion, and then finally the story of the resurrection. But the book is built around five major teaching discourses with narratives that lead up to them, and these we call books 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And book 1, the teaching narrative, is very famous. We call that the Sermon on the Mount of Jesus. And we have spent 4 weeks now, well, this is the fourth week, on this book number 1, and the third week on the Sermon on the Mount. And so we're going to be in chapter 7 of Matthew's Gospel, and I hope that you enjoy it. It begins chapter 7 with 2 verses. Very famous, do not judge, Jesus said, so that you will not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure that you give will be the measure that you get. So the Bible tells us not to judge, and yet we know people do it all the time. It seems that we're supposed to judge without being judgmental. Jesus judged the religious leaders of Israel. That's pretty clear. How did he find the right balance? The words of Matthew 7, verse 1 are pretty strong. Just don't judge, but there are times when you have to judge. How do we find the right balance too? God is often pictured as a judge. Jesus judged and even condemned others, like the money changers in the temple. He cursed the fig tree. John the Baptist surely judged. He called the Pharisees a viper's brood. So to judge or not to judge may not be the best question, the core question. We need to ask, what does the Bible mean by don't judge? When is it appropriate to judge and when is it not? How should we judge? Why is it often crucial to exercise judgment? What is meant by don't judge? Because with the judgment that you make, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. Well, there's very practical danger in judging others. That is, we run the risk of receiving the same judgment right back at us. We are reluctant to criticize the ideas or the actions of others if we think that our own ideas will be criticized in return. This can be a problem in important areas of our work or our lives, our school, home, and especially in our close relationships. Reluctance to speak honestly for fear of being criticized means that we might miss helpful feedback. We can miss what we might really need to help us grow and improve. The truth is not always easy to hear, but it is vital to know. Jesus is not talking about important critical judgment when he says, do not judge. All right, going on, Matthew chapter 7, verses 3, 4, and 5. This is a story Jesus used to kind of illustrate this idea of judging. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. So this is a brief story that Jesus told to kind of help make his meaning clear. It's actually a pretty funny story. There are 2 guys. One guy becomes fixated on a tiny speck of sawdust in the other guy's eye. He becomes almost obsessive and compulsive about it. The speck is very small, a lot smaller than, say, a piece of eyelash stuck there. Most people would not even have noticed it. So the first guy's working hard to get the second guy to clean out his eye from the tiny speck of sawdust. And what's funny is that he's doing it while there's this plank, a big plank of wood stuck in his own eye. I mean, it's a silly picture if you think about it. The first guy seems to be unaware that he has a log hanging out of his eye. Jesus is probably not talking about most people in this story. I think he appears to be criticizing, judging his favorite targets, the religious leaders of the day. And he judges them for being hypocrites. Remember, hypocrite meant actor, someone who's, the idea is someone who's putting on something that's not true within. And he judges them for being hypocrites. They were always after people to be more religious. They were always criticizing and judging people for not being more religious and moral and for failing to keep the smallest specks of the law. At the same time, these religious leaders were participating in and profiting from a system that oppressed people, including widows and orphans. It was a system that contributed to people losing their land because their debt got so high, and so losing their means to make a living. These same religious leaders had often told the weak and the powerless that God had rejected them, and they were insisting that people clean the speck of sawdust out of their eyes while ignoring the logs in their own. Judging is not optional in life. It's inevitable. What matters is how you judge and what you do after the judgment, how you treat people once you've arrived at a decision. Some judgments are destructive. They have the effect of writing people off, breaking relationships, and retarding spiritual growth. Okay, so in verse 6, the next verse, Jesus says, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them underfoot and turn and maul you." It's a curious insertion at this point in Jesus' teaching, but I think it's important that we pay attention to some key words. First of all, holy would have indicated something really ready for sacrifice in the temple, like a burnt offering, some lamb without blemish, or the first fruit of your produce. Pearl was a term that Jesus used to describe the kingdom of God. He called it a pearl of great price. On the other hand, dogs and swine referred to what was filthy or shameful to the Jews of Jesus' day. Perhaps Jesus was teaching that the precious gospel can be brought into ill repute by judgmental behavior and failing to embrace its deep meaning. But at any rate, we love dogs, and maybe you love pigs too. But in Jesus' time, those were considered profane, and the way that religious people act would often profane the precious gospel. Verses 7 through 11, "Ask and it will be given to you. Search or seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open for you. For everyone who asks receives. Everyone who searches finds. For everyone who knocks, the door will be open. Is there any among you who, if your child asks for bread, will give a stone, or a child who asks for a fish will give a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him?" So there are parallel passages to this, to Matthew and Luke's gospel. And in Luke 11:9-3, this same passage appears, but it's used in a slightly different place right after, or almost right after, the Lord's Prayer. So the context of asking, seeking, and knocking is prayer in Luke's gospel. The two important ideas help in discerning this section. First, life responds to our best longing. This is a quotation, I don't know from whom, but it makes a lot of sense to me. It's important to desire what is best, to seek, to knock, to ask for what is best. And second, that God's answers do not appear ready-made and handed to us. They require work, some assembly required, some mining. Asking, seeking, and knocking all point to one truth, that we are on a journey, and the answers we seek only come in the process of living and growing on that journey. Our treasure that comes through diligent mining is often worth more to us than the treasure that's just handed to us. We can trust that God desires us to have the best, even more than a loving parent desires to give bread or fish, not stone or reptile, to children who are hungry. Compared to God, even the most loving parents are evil. Compared to God's generosity, even the most generous of us are stingy misers. All right, Matthew 7, verse 12. "And everything do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets." And of course, this is the golden rule, a statement of the golden rule. Now, about 60 years or so before Jesus, Rabbi Hillel taught that the essence of Judaism was do not do unto others what you would not have others do to you, kind of a negative statement of that. He said that in response to somebody asking him to give the essence of Judaism while standing on one foot. In other words, make it quick. To live this way requires some reflection of how you want to be treated, and also to put yourself in another person's place, that how you want to be treated and how you think they would really want to be treated. All right, verses 13 and 14, "Enter the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the road is easy that leads to destruction, and there are many who find it and take it. For the gate is narrow, and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it." What's the best way for us to live? Well, there's a journey that leads to life, but it's hard and few find it. Few really experience that journey. If we want to experience the life of God's kingdom, we have to choose and to keep choosing to follow that more challenging way. In our own day, there are great temptations to seek quick success or wealth, maybe by gaming the system, or to seek a following by fomenting distrust and hatred. One of the lessons I learned after the 9/11 terrorist attack, just by observing our own society, was how easy it is to bring people together by finding a common enemy. Even in today's political climate, demonizing the other side creates a strong sense of community. But what is the end? The end is destruction, not life. The way to life is hard, and we can find ourselves thinking that we're on the way, only we're on the way to destruction. Verses 15 and 16, Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You'll know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles?" So a number of images, metaphor there. This teaching refers to Jesus' entire message that you can judge the quality of teaching by the fruit of the teacher's life. Good fruit only comes from healthy plants, and not only healthy plants, but fruit trees, plants that bear fruit. False prophets are really weeds and thistles. They don't bear any edible fruit. And then in verses 17 to 20, "In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor a bad tree good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you'll know them by their fruits." So, continuing this imagery, what matters is the transformation of a person's heart inside, and the results from that transformation in actions and attitudes that are rooted in love. It's not the religious rules or theological beliefs that matter as much as it is the change of heart and mind that we sometimes call being born again. Continuing chapter 7, verses 21, 22, and 23, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many deeds of power in your name?' Then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers.'" Genuinely calling on God is not only valid, but it's absolutely essential. But using religious language in the cloak of religious piety does not mean that a person actually belongs to God. There's a stark warning to those of us, particularly who are longtime churchgoers and clergy. It's tempting to use our outer image to seek things that are not compatible with Christ. A preacher needs to hear the gospel, not just preach it. Many who stand out as people of God in the current political climate, who put themselves out there as examples, fomenting judgmentalism and division, may well be espousing positions and lifestyles that Jesus would not even recognize. He would call them evildoers. Verses 24 through 27, "Everyone," this is getting near the end, Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. So this is the final teaching in this Book 1 discourse. It refers to the entirety of his message, all of the Sermon on the Mount. The wise person built his house on a firm and solid foundation of Jesus' teaching. The foolish person built his house on what turned out to be shifting sand, fads or things like that are not solid. During the storms of life, the house built on a solid foundation stands, but the other falls disastrously. In Luke's version of this parable, both builders put houses on a floodplain, but the wise builder dug deep and found a solid, rock-solid foundation. The foolish builder took the easy route and built on the surface. And when the floods came, the one house stood, the other was swept away. It just reminds me of that wonderful little nursery rhyme of the three little pigs. Two of them built the house out of straw and sticks, and the big bad wolf blew it down. But the third one built it out of brick, and it stood, the big bad wolf. Now, sorry for that. It just felt like an inspired moment. Now, in verse 28 and 9, the end of chapter 7, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as their scribes. Jesus' authority did not rest on academic or ecclesiastical credential, but on the solid wisdom of deep spiritual insight and experience. And speaking as one who does have academic and ecclesiastical credential, that's not necessarily worth anything. It all depends on what you experience, what you know, what you live, how you live. The people were impressed because Jesus spoke to them at their need and gave them teachings of great substance and practical application. And as with each of the 5 discourses in Matthew that we will find, when Jesus finished teaching, he got up and he left. And I'm going to do the same. So God bless you. Take care. And I'll see you next time.